Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Professional Previews. My name is Michael. I'll be your host today, and I'm joined here by Deb Bailey,
Hi.
who will introduce themselves a little bit later on in this. So just a little bit of background about Professional Previews. This is a program that gives everyday people just like you a little sneak peek into the lives of STEAM professionals, and just to get to learn how they got to where they are in their life, what's their journey, what are some lessons that they learned. And you will be able to ask questions throughout the presentation, but we will go to questions at the very end of the presentation. So feel free to just drop those in the chat. And at the very end, we will stop the recording. Everyone will have the opportunity to unmute themselves and turn on their video, so that way you can talk directly to Deb. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Deb.
Hi, good morning. And I know we're starting just a little late here. We had a little technical difficulty, so let me just go ahead and get started. So I'm going to very quickly just talk a little bit about who am I, and I have a little PowerPoint here, so we'll have some pictures. I like pictures. Anyway, who am I and how did I get here? And these are all pictures that represent something out of my life. And first of all, I'm a science teacher here at the museum. And this museum is my playground because I really love what I do. And we try to make it fun. We are all about exciting people in science. So if I love a science topic, I'm going to create a program about it, and I'm going to use toys. So, and believe it or not, the Trojan horse does have a connection to a cutting edge medical science program that I teach. So I tie in literature and all kinds of things. In any event, let me just note that my career here actually started many years ago, and I do emphasize many, very far from here. So we're going to go back to September 1973, which to me doesn't seem that long ago, and it doesn't sound bad. But anyway, I had just graduated from high school. I had no money for college. I was desperate to get out of the house I was in. I needed a way to support myself, because you can certainly want a career that you love and that fulfills you, but you also have to be able to support yourself. I wanted to be an English teacher, but believe it or not, at that time, there were a lot of teachers and not many jobs. So I had one piece of advice from my father, which was probably a decent piece, which was go to school for something you can get a job in. So I started out in biology, but realized that I needed a way to apply a science career into an actual job. And there is a career path that I started out in. I had a chance to intern for free a full summer at the University of Connecticut Health Center in Connecticut in their microbiology lab. So I went to school and graduated in medical laboratory technology. I will also say that I had no money, and so it was really difficult. So I actually did the equivalent of going to a community college. There wasn't one near me, but the UConn system had a local branch, so I could stay home, even though that was also unpleasant. But it was a way to save money, do 2 years of college relatively cheaply, and then go on to finish the other 2 years. The last year of college, I actually lived with my grandmother, and that was 12 months, and she was an interesting person. But in any event, I was able to do all of the training I needed at the hospital to finish my medical technology degree. And I worked at the UConn Health Center in Farmington, Connecticut for a while. I had even done that part-time through college so that I could be earning some extra money while I was going to school. Now, what is hospital lab like? I would say for me at least, it's like putting clues together to solve a mystery. For example, if you have a patient who comes into the ER and their symptoms are things like fever and chills, you need to find out what's going on. Well, one of the clues, their history, is they had recent surgery. Well, a possible diagnosis, maybe they've got an infection going on after their surgery. So what are you going to do about that? Well, a couple of things is, first, they're going to draw blood, and I would be one of those people who would come and draw the blood, collect a culture of the surgical site to see is there something wrong there, and bring all that back to the lab. The blood, one of the things they're going to do is they're going to run it through a machine called the cell counter. They're going to look to see, is there an infection? And the cells in your blood, the counts will tell them that. And here's an example, we would also make a smear and stain the smear to look at the types of cells. And here's an example of a normal smear right here. You have normal looking red cells. Those purplish stained things are different kinds of white cells, but this is a normal smear. If you have a bacterial infection, it's going to look more like this. And those particular cells, you're going to see a lot more of those scattered around. So you will have, those are called neutrophils. They fight bacteria. If you have a bacterial infection, you're going to see your white count go up, and a lot of those. So again, you're collecting pieces of the puzzle, the clues. In the bacteriology lab, you're going to take that swab, you're going to roll it onto some different types of agar media to grow bacteria. And you're also going to make another kind of a smear from that specimen, and you're going to use a different stain called a gram stain that this would be an example of. So I'm looking at this slide and I can see there's blood cells there. But if you notice, there's also chains of purple dots, and some of those neutrophils have actually eaten some of those chains. So that's telling me that there are bacteria present. Okay, so again, lots of clues. So bacteria, you know, if you incubate that plate that you swabbed and put it at in a box that's at not room temperature, but body temperature, it's going to grow out some bacteria if there's an infection going on. Here's an example of one that has, it actually, the bacteria are moving across the plate, which is why it has those wavy rings. And it smells like chocolate cake, believe it or not. And one of the things you do when you look at a plate, you look to see, what does the colony look like? What does it smell like? Those are the first two clues. These colonies smell like grapes. So now there is also the knowledge you're trained of what should or shouldn't be there for a particular specimen. So in the case of, if they did a throat culture, it's going to look something like this because you have bacteria in your throat and you're supposed to. If you went traveling and you picked up a salmonella infection from something you ate, your stool specimen, the yellow colonies here are normal, but those black colonies are a clue that you might have salmonella. In this case, somebody with an infected skin wound should not have anything growing, but if you see some of these types of colonies, there's different types of bacteria there, that's an indication there's a problem. So back to your patient, you would want their plate to look like this. However, in this case, it might look something like this plate. And this, right from how it looks and how it smells to me, I am already suspicious this is staph. And so I'm going to do a smear, that gram stain. And when I see clusters of what look like grapes on the slide and they're purple in this stain, that's another indication we're talking staph. And then I'm going to do a few tests. Here's one where you can put hydrogen peroxide on the staph colony. If it fizzes, I know I've got a staph. And I'll do a few other tests. I'll identify for sure that that's what it is. And then I'm also going to, the most important thing, the doctor needs to know, what do I treat this with? And I would put this bacteria all over this plate. And then I have these discs that have different antibiotics on them. And depending on the zone, that's showing that around those discs, some of those are more effective at killing that bacteria, which is why there's a zone that's clear around them. And in this case, one of the things they worry about with staph is a drug called methicillin. Well, that's a common way to treat it, but there are a lot of staph now that are resistant. So again, it's all about what is going on with the patient and how do we help them. And also you might, another thing you do if you work in the lab, if someone's bleeding after they have surgery, they might need a transfusion. So I would be responsible for taking their blood and trying to mix it with unit blood and see which one will be compatible. And when I say compatible, if you see the blood that you mix together from the unit and from you on a slide and it has these clumps in it, you do not transfuse that because this would cause a transfusion reaction. The patient would get very sick. And I will simply say about this, this is a slide that is, I do a longer program, and it simply explains that the blood cells have a lot of different little chemicals on them. And so some are type A blood, some are type B or O, and each person can only get certain types. So I would have to test that to make sure they get the right unit. You would also get some things like blood glucose, make sure your sugar level's okay, or your salt levels. We're looking to make sure with these chemistry tests, and we do them on large machines like this, we want to make sure that the person's body systems, their heart, their liver, their kidneys, are all working well. Now, I was working in hospitals from 1975 until 1990. And during that time period is when the earliest indications of the HIV, the AIDS epidemic starting at that time. And this was a time of a lot of panic because nobody understood what was going on. And unfortunately, some of those patients were really isolated by a lot of their friends and family because no one knew why they were sick and they were scared of them. Now, in the 1980s and the 1990s, when you contracted AIDS, you would live for a period of time, but then you would die. It was a very rare person that lived. Here is, this is called the AIDS Memorial Quilt, and it is a quilt that is on display as folk art, and it is representative of the people who died from AIDS. And it is 54 tons at this point. It was created in 1986 by Cleve Jones, who was an HIV activist, and it was to honor his friend who died. So he did the first panel. And by 2020, there are over 50,000 panels representing people who got sick and died. Now, I grew up in Connecticut, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but we moved in 1990 down here to North Carolina, and I started working at the Duke University Medical Center, and it was in a cell biology lab. We were trying to find ways to get a vaccine that could treat HIV or could prevent it. They're still working on that to this day. I spent a year there doing research with that group, and then I moved on to the pharmaceutical company. It was just called Glaxo at the time. Now it's GlaxoSmithKline. We worked on a team for an AIDS drug that was in development, and we called it 3TC. That was our abbreviation, but it's been approved since then. It's called lamivudine. The thing about this drug is it was critical in some of the later successes for treatment, and it is a long-term superstar in that this drug that was approved in 1995 is still used today successfully. Just to give you an indication, by 1994, there were only 4 drugs that you could use to treat people with AIDS. And unfortunately, that only bought them extra time. It didn't prolong their life past a certain point. The drug I worked on, 3TC, was approved by the FDA in 1995, and this long list since then is only a small fraction of all the new drugs since then. This is why AIDS has become a chronic disease, and that if the individual takes the drugs faithfully, it can be a chronic disease, not a death sentence. Now, from there, I went on to continue in a different way with pharmaceuticals. I was always more patient-oriented than necessarily a corporation. And the function of an IRB or it's an ethics board, you're there to protect people in research studies. People who join a research study to test a drug to see, can it be approved? Is it safe? Is it effective? My job was to make sure that they were being told everything that we knew as we knew it, that they weren't forced into that study, that things weren't being done to them that they didn't know about, and that they had the free right to say, I will do this or I will not. Now, why would you need an IRB? You'd think that that was common sense, but the truth of the matter over history, from World War II, the Nazis did horrible things to people in medical experiments. The Tuskegee Airmen in World War II, things were done to them by giving them a disease they weren't told about. And Henrietta Lacks, this is a great book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. She had cancer. And that was back in the 1950s. Her cells are still used to this day in successful medical research. However, no one in her family was ever asked, were they allowed to do that? So you really need a group that are looking out for people's rights in these studies. Now, science, I did it in a different vein here too. At the same time, I was also doing freelance writing. I would do science articles for Boys Life. I did whatever it needed to pay the bills. So I helped write dictionary meanings and verify that the definitions for words were correct. So I'm actually a lexicographer. You know, that's a fancy name for I wrote dictionary entries. And Great Expectations, CliffsNotes. And I also am old enough to have been going to Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia for over 50 years, and I love the place. So I wrote a book about my experiences over the last 50 years. And then life changes in an instant, and that happens. My husband almost died. Then we also had my son left for college, the dog died, and I just could not do the pharmaceutical research anymore. I just couldn't. And so the big question became, well, what am I here for? And what am I going to do? I need to work. If I don't do the medical field, that's all I know. I had so much anxiety at that time, I couldn't even get off the couch. I was just so scared, and I was panicking. And the answer is actually from my past, but I didn't know it yet. So I did the only thing I could at the time, and I volunteered to clean fish tanks at the museum here in Raleigh. And while I did that, I pondered my past. My past is in Connecticut. I grew up in a city called Torrington, and it's in the northwest hills of the state. This is an aerial shot of the town. It is an old factory town. So when I was growing up, we had a lot of factories and it was thriving, but over the 60s and 70s, they all shut down. And so there's not a lot of jobs. It's also, for anybody who's a history buff, the birthplace of John Brown, the abolitionist. And today, a lot of those factories may still be there, and a lot of them are just boarded up. And it's kind of a town looking for a new identity. And my grandparents worked in a lot of those factories. They made ball bearings for cars and airplane engines. My grandmother worked making ladles and, you know, egg beaters. Another grandfather worked during World War II, where they made all the shells for the ammunition for the war. This is the house I grew up in. It's a 3-family house, which is very common up there and nothing very fancy. We lived on one floor. My grandparents lived on another, and my great aunt lived on the third. As a matter of fact, that whole town, there's a lot of immigrants, and my own grandparents are from Slovakia. They were born here but went back, and so they went back and forth. And this is pictures for their passport photos. And then as a kid, I was always into many things. I loved science, so I got a microscope for Christmas one year. And at that time, I could actually save up my allowance to go buy little pickled fish and crayfish and frogs to dissect. You can't do that anymore, but you know, I loved history. I loved stories and mysteries, adventure, school. All of those were my joys. I lived for books, and I still do. My house is full of them at home. However, at the same time, I will say that my household was a male-dominated household, as was the culture. And women had no power. And my home life was actually very violent. And there were worse things that were happening to me. And that went on for a very long time. This painting that I did, this is how I felt for many years, especially as a kid, teenager, young adult. I felt basically different from everyone else, ashamed and alone, just despair. About the time I started high school, I was pretty much giving up. You know, you're living day to day. You don't even think about a career at that point. My sheet, when I got into school, listed my English class and said TD, and I'm like, what is that? The first day of class, TD turns out to be Mrs. Teresa Doyle. And I'm going to take a moment to tell you, she is the most amazing person. As a teacher, she has presence and passion and fire. It blew me away. You know, she was a young woman at the time. She walked into the front of the room and took command of that class. And I'd never seen anyone that powerful and that young, and a woman. I was in awe. And she was a good teacher, and she cared about us. And I lived for her class. And teachers can save lives. We had to write a daily journal, and so you would have to turn it in periodically to get it graded. And I got mine back, and it said, "Excellent, you are quite a writer with a great imagination." That was so powerful for me. I didn't realize I was excellent at anything at that point. And she was my lifeline through a very, very dark time. Now, a few years later, I happened to read this book, Man's Search for Meaning, and it said that people can take everything from you except one thing, what you think and what you choose. Those things are yours no matter what. Because of Terry Doyle, I chose life. And believe me, there were times that I struggled. But her caring and her example gave me strength to go on, and I could accept help from therapists. I started to find friends and eventually love and a wonderful family and a rich life. And that is my family today. And we are very joyful. Now, coming back to those museum fish tanks, how did I go from that background? Well, there's a man here, Bob Alderink, who is an excellent educator, does great shows for science. And I mentored with him and found out that I really love taking everything from my background and figuring out how to have fun with it and be creative. And basically it's play for me. And the kids got that. And so finally I was getting to be a teacher, even if it wasn't English. There was just one problem. I was a volunteer and I needed a paycheck. And that's where the fork in the road came for my path here, because, you know, I was never was taking care of doing the work at the time while I tried to figure out what to do. My background's pharmaceutical and medical, and a friend of mine wanted to hire me in her pharmaceutical company. And I would have made a lot of money. It would have been the logical, responsible choice. Take the job that pays the money. The other choice was to hang in there and hope that I maybe might get a teaching job at the museum. And I started going for the pharmaceutical job because the responsible thing, I need to bring in an income. However, I just couldn't do it anymore. My gut was like, this is wrong. And I finally said to my husband, I can't do this. And he says to me, I know. And I looked at him and I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me? And he's like, well, you had to figure that out for yourself. So what I ended up doing was hanging in there. And within about another year or year and a half, I was fortunate in that several jobs came open in education, and I was able to get one of them. As a matter of fact, the job I did for my first 8 years here was to help with Christy Flint, who is now our head of education. And we created the Microworld Investigate Lab from scratch. And this was really our playground. We created all kinds of lab experiments that people could come in and do themselves, learn about science and not even know they were learning. They were having too much fun. I also created a board game to teach the kids all about the drug development process and the careers in it. And these days now, for the last year now, I've been working back with Bob Alderink, and I'm out on the exhibit hall floors and in our room called Windows on the World doing, there are new adventures and new programs. I just created this summer, we had a hunt that kids came in and did where they had to find the endangered species in our museum. And so I created this hunt for them to do that. And I have a number of new programs coming up, including this one that ties that story of the Trojan horse, along with a toxic cone snail from the South Pacific and a new drug for pain relief and the story of how that comes about. Now, why do I do this? I want to reach as many kids as I can. I want to pass on hope to keep going. I want to give back what I was given. And I ask all of the kids in my classes, please choose life. If you can find something that you like and find a first job that'll pay your bills and get started, you can always use that to get you to another place. And I know that's easy to say. And how would you actually do that? Well, what I also try to tell the kids in my classes is that at least in North Carolina, the state has invested heavily in growing a biotech, medical, and pharmaceutical industry, and they need trained people. And it's a great place to start because there are jobs that you can do coming out of high school. They will train you. Now they need people from every level out there, whether it's high school graduates who can work to get all of the lab specimens labeled and get them ready for the researchers. They need people in skilled trades and technical skills. They need business managers and PhD researchers. And also, if you don't want to be a science researcher, I get that. They need graphic artists, they need writers, they need people who are good at computers. So there's a wide range of fields to support all of this. Now they pay well, they have good benefits, and you gain experience. As a matter of fact, I saw this article that said the average salary for a life sciences professional in North Carolina is $91,000 a year. Now, that range can start in the mid 50s or 40s and go even higher than the 91,000. So the thing is, now here's an example just I want to share that I just found out about. LabCorp, who does all the lab tests when you have your blood drawn, they have a program where even if you graduate from high school and you start working at one of their lowest level jobs to just log in all the lab specimens, you do that for 6 months. They will then, they have an arrangement with Arizona State University and City University of New York, where you can take all of your classes online for an undergraduate science degree. And then you're working in the lab right there to get your lab experience. So you could come out with a lab related or a life sciences related undergraduate degree. They will tuition reimburse, and you're able to do this while you continue working. Now, the other thing I will simply say, and I'm going to just skip over a couple, but our community college system here in North Carolina is a tremendous asset. They have a lot of opportunities with different career paths. And what I really want to point out, this is the most important. For example, they offer 6-month or 1-year job certifications to do something in the skilled trades or in the biotech industry at a starting entry-level position. And you can continue to go to school on the side and do a 2-year transfer if you want to continue on to a regular university. Wake Tech here in Wake County, they have things to help you complete high school if you haven't done that. Here's a non-degree program in digital manufacturing. You can learn robotics, 3D printing, CAD. They also, as I mentioned, they have different biotechnology and pharmaceutical 6-month, 1-year, 2-year programs. There's even something now where they're training, and I don't even totally understand blockchain technology, but it has to do with computer security. But they're already offering cutting edge new career paths. And they have 13 different locations here in Wake County. Durham Tech also has the same types of things available. And there's just one thing I want to point out here. They're all about short-term courses that can get you started in actual jobs and then give you something to come back to go on further in your education. And I'll skip the rest of this other than to say they can also offer continuing education. They also offer back to work, and they have other scholarship and grant programs for people who need money to do this. In terms of a 4-year or a graduate degree here in North Carolina, we have North Carolina Central in Durham, who has an amazing new biotech center and a really good program. Same thing with NC State. They have a state-of-the-art training facility and undergrad and grad programs. And one last note about my life, just to kind of do a quick turn here. It's not just all science. When I'm not at the museum, I do, normal things. I like unusual coffees. I love lobster. I oil paint. I used to downhill ski, and now that I like to make sure I don't break any bones, I just paint about skiing. I don't ski anymore. I love Halloween, so I painted these 2 paintings. This is the type of cave if I were out there and I wanted to be on Halloween. It's a 2-story cave, and the lower level of the cave is on the right-hand side. That's the little lab with all the potions. So if I could, be a Halloween character, I'd live there. I'm also all about adventure and Valkyrie warriors. That's me. And when I do finally retire, I have some dreams. I used to be an archer, and I was terrible at golf. I'd like to see if I could still do either one of those, and I'll exercise just to stay healthy. I wanted to be the English teacher, so I will go back to school for all those English classes that I couldn't take. I'm going to write the story of my life and warrior queen adventures. And I almost flunked calculus, and I'd like to prove that I'm smart enough to learn it, so I might go take a calculus class. And I will keep teaching here at the museum. I have one last thing I want to say before I close, and that is a heartfelt thank you. And there is honoring due. And Terry Doyle, I'm going to send the link to her for this meeting. And I would just like her to know, for the example that you set, for the treasured message in my journal, and most especially for the life you made possible by helping me hang in there so I could start. Thank you. Thank you, Terry Doyle, from the bottom of my heart. And by the way, she is still a force to be reckoned with today. I had dinner with her about a week ago and it was lovely. So that's my quick presentation, or not so quick, but let me just get out of that. So as you can see, as I tell my students in my classes, I'm old. I've had time to do a lot of things. So
Well, thank you, Deb, for going through that journey. And one thing that I really enjoy about this is that you did not have a set path. I know that was one thing that I was taught growing up, is you need to know what you need or what you want to do when you're in high school. That's what you go to college for, and then that's what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. And you showed that that is not the case whatsoever.
no, and I would caution any kid out there, don't get caught. Yes, you have to start somewhere. So figure out some place to start, but you are not going to map your your whole life out and be able to say, I've got it all planned. And don't be afraid to make a mistake, because I've learned from the mistakes and they turned out sometimes to be the absolute right things.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I just had a couple of questions about some of the things in your presentation.
Yes.
So you said that you were working in the medical field from 1975 to around 1990 or so.
In hospitals.
In hospitals. So how did you notice the medical field changing throughout that time? Especially with the AIDS epidemic, and how were attitudes shifting? How were medical procedures changing, or how were people treated?
The AIDS time was a really difficult time because everybody was scared and society was not very forgiving. They were very judgmental a lot of times about the people who were dying of AIDS. I sat next to a man on an airplane flight who said to me, well, don't you think they deserve to die? And it was all I could do not to choke them right in the seat. So yes, there were some not very nice people, but there were also people who were lovely and dedicated, and who dedicated their life to caring for the people who were sick in case no one else wanted to. And within hospitals, what I saw was a rapid expansion of how do we continue to give care appropriately, protect people's privacy, because you don't want to plaster a sign on someone's room that says HIV patient. You want to give everybody equal treatment. And how do we protect the people who are working there? And that's really where a lot of that original protective gear really started to take off. They always had some, but it really became a very strict way to approach how you handle specimens, how you care for people, so that you're protecting them as well as you. And the technology, it's rapid changes over the 70s through the 90s and since then.
Yeah, and you were mentioning working for the international review boards, or for an ethics board.
Yes.
And the importance of how an IRB can really impact people, just informed consent. So all participants are knowledgeable and willing to participate because they know all of the risks as well as all the benefits. And you mentioned Henrietta Lacks, and one of the things that I recently learned is that the COVID vaccine we owe to the lineage of cells that came
Yes.
from Henrietta Lacks. And so did you have anything more that you wanted to mention about working on the ethics board?
I loved it. I did it for 10 years. It was good in a couple of ways. Personally, it was good because it allowed me to work. I could work at home for a lot of it at a time when that was unheard of. And I could be around because I was also doing the mom thing and running around doing stuff. But the thing I loved about it was that it played to what my soul was about, which was protecting people. I have always, maybe it's because of my background, I've always been really devoted to nobody should have their rights trampled on. And so, and I was really young and very energetic at that time. So, there were times we would not let a study start until we made sure. The biggest thing we did was that informed consent. If that wasn't right, we weren't letting that study start. And we also had the power to shut a study down. And I don't recall that we had to, but we also had to make sure that all the doctors and all the sites that were doing the research. We reviewed them and we would approve or deny them, and we did deny some. So I loved doing that work. It wasn't a power trip. It was really about, and we wanted to make sure people understood that they're not patients when they're in a study. You're not being treated. You are actually helping test something. So you are a subject, and don't ever let anybody tell you in a research study you are being treated, because you are taking a calculated risk, and that's important, and that's your choice. And that was probably the biggest thing we wanted everybody to understand, and that you have the power to change your mind. So
yes, and in the same vein of being able to change your mind and stuff, and you know, that was something that you mentioned while you were in this medical field, the medical realm. You realized this isn't really my path. This isn't really what I'm meant to continue doing. And so how did it feel to be able to just decide that? You know, how did that realization come? And
you mean to make the shift to here?
yeah, to make the shift to where you are now.
That was a difficult time, because as I mentioned, life changed in an instant, and I almost lost my husband. I'm grateful he is with me today. I had a difficult time after all of that, being able to keep reading. It gets to be very difficult, and it takes an emotional toll and a psychological toll on you too, when you are reviewing research studies in diseases like cancer, and you're doing this over and over and over and over. And I just burned out. I couldn't do it anymore. And it was terrifying, because it's like your entire life's training has been in a direction, and now it's like, well, what else am I qualified to do? How am I going to bring in an income? And I was just also reacting still to you know, the fact that we had been through something difficult with my husband. It was a time of life where, like, my son left for college. I was, you know, I loved my husband. I loved having him around. It was just a hard time. And so it was a slow evolution to what can I use my skills for, and what would have meaning. And I wasn't kidding when I said, well, I'll go do something that has meaning. And I mean, it's important. I clean fish tanks. Those fish needed clean tanks. It gave me a place where I could put aside some of my anxiety, do something for another creature. And then I connected with Bob, and that really became the beginning of a whole new career path, because Bob was doing science classes, and he is a masterful teacher, and he's fun. And I got to help him. And at the time, I didn't care. I just set up tables and I watched him. And then I started gradually helping with the classes. And then we realized we could take a lot of my background, which was labs, and start implementing that into some of the classes. And that grew from there. And I loved it. And this kind of harkens back to my childhood, where I you know, I had the microscope, I had the chemistry set. I used to make plaster of Paris models of undersea shipwreck sites because I just liked to.
Yeah.
So I'm doing that now. And so that is really, and then slowly, as I said, I looked back at my past, remembered how much of an impact Terry Doyle had in my life, in terms of, and how many kids she's probably touched over the years. And I realized that here is an opportunity for meaning, that, and that happens a lot later in life. It's like, how do I take what I did the first half and use it? Because I'm getting tired, and we need a whole new generation of scientists and kids doing whatever, but having passion for their careers. And so what better way than to try to show them that you can change paths, you can try new things, you can fail at something, it's not the end of the world, and have a good time while you're doing it.
Yeah.
So if that answers your question, it was a gradual, and it was an anxiety-ridden process, but it was the right one. I've never regretted turning down that pharmaceutical job and taking the time to give a job at the museum to come about. My husband said to me, "You belong at the museum." And I wanted it. So that was one time I listened to my heart. And yeah, our bank accounts weren't happy, but it was the right decision, and I've never regretted it.
That's good. And it actually leads into a question that we have from an audience member. Bianca asks, did you ever feel unsure about your ability to succeed in a new field? And how did you know it was time to change careers? Which I think you kind
Well,
of
the second part I definitely answered, and the first part about did I ever feel unsure? Oh God, yeah. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I did when I was doing the dictionary writing, I also did freelance editing, which means that I had to call a New York editor and tell them that I can do the job. And then when I got the job, I had to rapidly gather up all of the books that taught me how to do the job and learn very quickly so that I could do the job. And if you think I wasn't terrified, when I made those phone calls, I would get myself calm, tell myself I could do this. I had a script written out on a card in front of me. I would make the phone call. I would sound positive and powerful. We'd get done. I'd hang up the phone and I'd go, oh.
It sounds like me after a stressful meeting anyway.
And you know, anytime I've done anything new, it's always scary, and you do it anyway because you give it a shot, you know? What that's the adventure part, I guess. And you can be scared and you can still keep going. I guess
Yeah.
that's the thing.
Yeah. And
I also had very good support at home, and that my husband kept telling me, you are good at this, keep going.
yeah, and so that also leads to a next question. Kay Brinson asks, what do you believe was the most impactful experience that brought you to this career? And what do you say to someone who's unsure of what they want to do?
If you're unsure of what you want to do, the thing I would suggest is just, you know, ask yourself what you like to do and see if there's places where you can go meet those people and talk to them. Because quite often when you talk to somebody, you may end up way, you know, I have a joke in my house about way leads onto way. Robert Frost is probably rolling over in his grave because I've massacred his poem. But the thing is, if you talk to somebody and then they go, well, have you ever thought about this? And go talk to this person. The thing is, by going out and checking out some things you like to do and talking to other people, you may get ideas that lead you to something. And go try it, you know, especially when you are young. If you're not, you know, if you're not in a situation where you've got a mortgage and you've got to support others, that's the time to really take a chance and experiment. And the first half of that question was, what was the key moment for turning to this career?
Mhm.
It was probably being terrified on that couch. It was the pain of almost losing my husband. It was all the terror I felt because I watched all that go on, and knowing that I could no longer continue doing the job I had, and that I had to do something. And I was terrified sitting on the couch. It was like, I'm not a person to sit still. So that was what said to me, do what you know, go look for something that you can do and help something. So I went to the museum. I love science. So I was like, surely I can help clean something.
Yeah.
And that slowly led to this direction. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I really do enjoy that one of the things that you highlighted is every job at an institution is important.
Yes.
It is not just the researchers, it's not just the scientists, it's not just this person or that person. You also have the graphic designers, you have the janitors, the custodial
Yes.
staff. All of those people work together to make the entire organization functional. And so I am very glad that you did draw attention to that, because that's something, you know, a lot of people might not realize is still a viable career path. You know, going into facilities maintenance is still very viable, and everywhere needs maintenance.
My
Yeah.
son worked driving a box truck to pick up recycling in academic buildings at a local university after he got out of college, and he was waiting to start grad school. And he did that for a year. And he always made a point of going in and looking people in the eye and saying hello to them. And he said there were so many people who never even looked at him or responded. So that's not right, because you need everybody doing their job or things will not work right. So I try to remember everybody.
Yeah, yeah. And so we have another question
Yes.
from a registrant. So Christine J asks, any advice for someone in a career switch mid 40s in today's bizarre job market? I'm looking to get back to my biology roots after 20 years as an animal behaviorist, maybe more current coursework in the field or lab work. I feel I have a lot to offer, but cannot break through for an interview, even at an entry level.
You know what I would, if it were, if it were me at this point, knowing what I know, and I took a couple of the pharmaceutical classes, for example, at Wake Tech, just to see what their job training classes were like. And they do an excellent job. And what I might suggest is, this is a case of go to, if I'm not sure where you're located, if you're near Wake Tech, they've got tremendous wide-ranging science programs, and they have a lot in biotech. Go talk to them to see, is there something that you can be retrained? Because they're retraining, they're all about job change as well. And a job change into a biotech research career. And I don't know what degrees you have at this point, but the other thing is you could also go and talk to somebody at North Carolina Central or North Carolina State. There's a place at North Carolina State called the BTech Center, and it was funded by the tobacco lawsuit money. It is the Biomanufacturing Training and Education Center. And they have a master's degree program. They train industry professionals. You could do something at Wake Tech to get a job in their field, in a biotech company or a pharmaceutical company. And then, decide that, okay, well, this got me in the door here and this is great, and I might want to go back for a master's. NC State has a program where not only do they teach you the biology or the science and the pharmaceutical part of it, they also teach you the business manager skills should you want to do a managerial track. So I would say at the very least, start talking to somebody in the local community colleges, because they are all about not just kids coming out of high school, but people wanting to retrain for new careers.
Mhm. Yeah, we've got a couple of things coming in the chat. I'm sorry, my vision's not that great. It says, what are the best ways to learn college/university level subjects while you're disabled and unable to attend classes?
Now, I do know, for example, I'll reference the LabCorp thing where they have online, all the coursework the students would be doing online from wherever they're living. So they would be doing it on a computer with Arizona State University or the City University of New York for that particular program. I can't speak to Wake Tech or some of these other universities, but there are a lot of universities that do have online courses. Now, the one thing about that is you may or may not, it depends on the university, you may be committed to being there at a certain time. And I can recognize that even that might be a problem for some. Some of the universities do have online things that can be done at your schedule. So my suggestion would be to maybe do some Google searching or talk to a local university about who might have online programs and how flexible are they. That may be a way to start.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that as well, of contacting places and asking about their accessibility accommodations is something that, you can always at least try to find out more information. And so, yeah, keep asking things in the chat. We'll probably go on for about another 10 minutes or so. And I have a couple of other questions for Deb that are a little bit less career oriented. And this will be as simple as, what is the most recent song you listened to? Like on the way in, or yeah.
We're going to really flip to the other direction. But, there was a song, and again, I love to listen. My husband will tell you I flip channels constantly on the radio. I'm one of those people. But coming in this morning, I was really pleased because there's a song I happen to love, and they almost never play it. And it's an oldies song. It was from the 1960s or early 70s, and that was by the Guess Who. And it is a song called No Time. And I think that also speaks to me because so often I feel like there's not enough time. I want more time. I want to do this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this. And the thing about the song, part of it was the person who wrote it didn't want to be wasting time on things that didn't matter. And that, I think, is the sum of my life at this point. I don't want to waste time. I don't want people wasting my time. I want to do things that are creative and fun and reach people or just have meaning. So No Time by the
Yeah.
Guess Who.
Yeah. And so how about a favorite element? And I'm a huge fan of Avatar, so this can be in terms of water, earth, fire, or air, or you can go to more science-oriented route and choose one from the periodic table.
Well, I'm kind of a rock person. So, in terms of the basic elements, it would probably be fire because I'm always fiery. I'm always ranting about something or, getting out there. So fire, definitely. In terms of an element, and I can't tell you why, but I always liked the element argon, and it is called an inert gas. But the thing about the inert gas is that it allows, they use that and a couple of other gases if you, for example, if you're welding, and you need to have a gas, it's sort of a gas that doesn't interfere with something else's process. It makes a process possible, but doesn't interfere with it. And so maybe that's the thing about teaching and teachers, is that you are the thing that you're the gas that makes a process possible for another, for them to come to their whatever they're to be, and you provided the means without interfering with it. That just popped in now, but that, I always found it, I always loved argon, the inert gas, and I think I just finally realized why.
Yeah. I think what we should do is create a periodic table, and then all of our guest speakers, we mark off
Yeah.
the things, because I feel like no one would have ever said argon. So interesting.
Yeah.
And do you do a lot of travel? This could be for work or for leisure.
Travel is not something I've had in the last couple of years, especially with COVID, though I just did a nice trip. And, occasionally we run down to Savannah to see our son. I would like to do more, maybe once I'm retired. There are places I do want to go to. But there's so much that I like doing, so that when I'm not working, I'm still equally as happy at home. I can spend a day painting or reading, and I'm thrilled. But I also would love to go visit castles in England. So we'll see. As a matter of fact, somebody's pointing at me, and you wanted, I guess you wanted to put the camera on me. I was always about adventure, and so I'm sorry.
Your paintings too.
My painting, yes. I do a lot of painting. That's what she's referring to. I'll just pull this over here. This is the painting that I had in my slide. Now, it's a different style than I normally do, because I normally do a lot of very realistic painting. But this one, I'm also doing a lot of emotion painting to capture what did I feel about that background that I grew out of. And it will be part of a book that I will eventually write, to try to basically map out the journey, so that another can see that there is a journey to a new life. You can always reinvent yourself. You can always reach for something, even when you think there's nothing more. And maybe that's where books came in, because, I have an old copy of The Silent World, Jacques Cousteau. I wanted to be Jacques Cousteau. I read, the Scholastic Book Club when I was in school, the Treasure of the Great Reef. I loved about these two kids finding a sunken treasure. And, this was the map of the sunken site that I made out of plaster of Paris in my basement, just because. Mysterious Island, Jules Verne, I loved his stuff. And then, of course, Nancy Drew. I didn't have a lot of money, so I couldn't afford to buy many of them when I was growing up. It was as an adult that I went and bought the entire 51 book set, the old ones. And so I have them all now. And occasionally I'll read one just to relax. And the last thing I would show is this. And this, you can tell it's the 1960s because of this wild color cover here. But this is I call it my talisman. And a talisman in mythology is an item or some object that gives the hero their soul or their power. And it's not that this gives me my power, but it reminds me of my power. And this is that journal for Terry Doyle with her comment up here. And I have kept it to this day and will always keep it. And it is a treasure. So
Yeah.
it's a show and tell. I brought toys.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's great that you have these reminders of, kind of where you began and where you got your start. There is a proverb that says, don't forget where you came from.
No.
It's always that you should remember and appreciate those people like you did. You gave the special thanks to Terry Doyle and to your husband and the people who were there that helped you. And it is incredibly important to remember where you came from, because without those people, you wouldn't be where you are today.
Maybe it's because I'm older too. There is a saying, it was by a Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and he commented about people who survived the Holocaust. And he observed that when they got out, the first thing they did was they built a life. And then when they were older, they looked back and they reflected and they got the meaning, and then they started sharing and teaching. And maybe that's what I've done in my life as well, is like I got out, I built a life, I learned along the way, and now I look back and I'm starting to talk about these things because maybe this is a gift that can be given to others.
Mhm.
So, at some point, all of you will have a story of your own, and yes, do look back on it periodically, because sometimes there's little nuggets of wisdom you can give yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're approaching time. So what we're going to do is just kind of end the recording for right now. But this will end the recording session, but we can still hang on for a little bit longer. And if people would like to unmute themselves or turn their video on and continue the conversation with Deb or myself, then that's what we can do. And so I just wanted to say thank you, Deb, for joining us for professional previews today. And thank you everyone who was able to join us.